The evening air inside the restaurant was warm, filled with soft alien music and the chatter of voices from different worlds. Shimmering lights hung from the ceiling, glowing gently like fireflies. Every table was busy, couples laughing, families eating, waiters walking quickly between them. But one table stood out, silent and still. At that table sat Lyra, a young alien girl with pale blue skin and deep violet eyes. Her delicate hands rested nervously on her lap, and her translator device blinked weakly on her collar. She wore a soft silver dress that shimmered every time she moved. Across from her sat Taryn, her blind date, tall, dressed in royal colors and clearly bored. He tapped his claws on the table, sighing loudly, looking around the room instead of at her. Lyra wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't. She was deaf, and her translator was half broken again. It only worked when others spoke clearly, and Taryn hadn't even looked at her long enough to try. She tried to sign with her hands, but he frowned in annoyance, pretending not to understand. Other aliens at nearby tables whispered to one another. Lyra could not hear them, but she could see their expressions, the laughter in their eyes, the mocking smiles. It made her chest hurt. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together, wishing she could just disappear. Taryn sighed again. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "I was promised someone normal." Lyra's translator blinked weakly, catching half the words. Ridiculous. Normal. Her heart sank. She quickly grabbed a small notepad from her bag and wrote something with shaky hands. She turned it around to show him. It said, "I'm sorry if I'm not what you expected." Taryn looked at the note, then at her. He rolled his eyes. "You should be," he said coldly, pushing back his chair. The sound of the metal scraping across the floor made people turn their heads. The restaurant went quiet for a moment. Lyra looked up, confused, and saw him standing. "I don't waste my time with broken things," he said. His words were sharp, cruel, and they hit her harder than she expected. The translator caught every one of them, glowing in red letters across her vision. She froze, her throat tight, unable to breathe. Taryn threw a few credits on the table and walked away. A few aliens laughed softly, trying to hide their smiles. Lyra sat still, staring at her plate. Her hands trembled. She didn't cry, not yet, but her heart felt heavy, like a stone sinking deep into dark water. At a nearby table, a human man watched everything. He was sitting with a small girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, who was happily eating something sweet and sticky. The man's name was Jake, and he was a mechanic, one of the few humans who worked on this alien colony. He had grease marks on his jacket and a calm, kind face. Jake saw the scene unfold. The arrogant alien, the silence, the hurt in the girl's eyes. His daughter, Mia, noticed too. She looked up at her father and tugged his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered softly. "That girl's sad." Jake followed her gaze. The alien girl sat alone now, staring at the empty chair in front of her. The translator's light flickered weakly, almost fading. Jake sighed. He hated seeing someone being treated like that. It reminded him of when humans were new to this colony, laughed at, ignored, seen as less. He looked at Mia, who was still watching Lyra with worried eyes. "Finish your dessert, sweetheart," he said gently. "I'll be right back." Mia nodded, her small hand gripping her spoon tightly. Jake stood up and walked toward the silent table. He moved slowly so he wouldn't startle her. Lyra didn't notice him until his shadow fell across the table. She looked up suddenly, eyes wide, her translator blinking weakly again. Jake smiled kindly and spoke softly. "Are you okay?" She blinked, confused. The translator flickered and buzzed. It didn't catch his words properly. So Jake paused, then reached into his pocket, pulled out his datapad and wrote on the screen. "Are you okay?" He turned it toward her. Lyra's eyes widened. No one had done that before, taken the time to write to her. She stared at the glowing words, then at him. Slowly, she nodded. Jake smiled again, a warm, gentle smile that made her feel something she hadn't felt all evening. Safety. He noticed the small device on her collar sparking faintly. "Translator problem?" he wrote again. She nodded quickly. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then grinned. "I can fix things," he wrote. "Mind if I take a look?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded again. She handed him the device carefully, her fingers brushing his hand by accident. It was warm, human warmth, simple but real. As Jake examined the small translator, Mia ran up beside him, holding her dessert cup. "Dad," she said softly, "is she okay?" Jake smiled at his daughter, then at Lyra. "She will be," he said quietly. For the first time that night, Lyra smiled. Small, unsure, but real. In a noisy restaurant full of voices she couldn't hear, she finally felt someone had listened. Jake sat across from the alien girl, his datapad still in his hand, waiting for her to respond. The restaurant's light shimmered softly around them, but the moment felt quiet, private. Lyra looked at the glowing words on the pad. "Are you okay?" And for a second she didn't know how to answer. No one had ever asked her that before. Most people ignored her or spoke about her as if she couldn't understand. Her hands trembled as she picked up the stylus and wrote back, "I'm fine. Thank you." Jake read the words and smiled kindly, but he could tell she wasn't fine at all. He had seen that same kind of sadness before, on lonely mechanics, broken soldiers, and people who tried to hide pain behind polite smiles.
He didn't push her, though.
Instead, he nodded slowly, letting her feel comfortable. Then he noticed the little translator device on her collar flickering again, a faint spark jumping from its surface. "Looks like your translator's having a bad day," he wrote on the datapad. Lyra glanced down and nodded quickly. She typed back, "It broke weeks ago. No one could fix it?" Jake raised an eyebrow, half grinning. "Well," he typed, "you're sitting with the best human mechanic on this side of the colony." That made her blink in surprise. A tiny, uncertain smile curved on her lips. Jake tapped the table, gesturing for her permission, and when she nodded, he carefully unclipped the translator from her collar. He handled it gently, like it was something precious. As he opened the small panel with his pocket tool, a faint smell of burnt circuits rose. "Poor thing," he muttered softly, more to himself than to her. "Looks like someone messed with you pretty bad." Lyra tilted her head, curious. Her translator was still in his hand, so she couldn't understand his words, but she watched him with wide, thoughtful eyes. His movements were careful, patient, very unlike most people she knew. At that moment, Mia, Jake's little daughter, walked over with a curious expression. She held her half-finished dessert cup in one hand and stared at Lyra. "Hi," Mia said cheerfully, her big brown eyes full of innocence. Lyra smiled softly. She didn't hear the words, but she understood the greeting. She waved gently in return. Jake looked up from the translator and smiled at his daughter. "Mia," he said softly, "say hi with your hands." Mia blinked. "How?" Jake showed her the sign for hello, just a simple wave of the hand in a friendly motion. Mia copied him, a bit clumsy but full of effort. Lyra giggled silently, her violet eyes bright for the first time that night. She mimed the same gesture back and Mia laughed, clapping her small hands. Jake glanced up at that laughter, and a thought passed through his mind. How strange it was that his daughter could make someone smile just by trying. A few moments later, Jake finished reconnecting the wires inside the translator. He tapped the side and the little lights blinked to life again, brighter than before. "Let's see if this works," he said. He held it out to her and she took it carefully like it might shatter. When she placed it back on her collar, a soft hum filled the air. The device vibrated lightly and spoke in a clear synthetic voice. "System restored. Communication mode active." Lyra's eyes widened. She looked around, her lips parting slightly in shock. Then hesitantly she said, "Can you hear me?" Her voice was soft and uneven, but the translator carried it clearly. Jake smiled, a little surprised. "Yeah," he said, gently nodding. "Loud and clear," Lyra gasped softly. She had never heard someone answer her that way before, not like it mattered, not like it was normal. "Thank you," she said quickly, almost breathless. "I didn't think anyone could fix it." Jake shrugged modestly. "You'd be surprised what a little care can do," he said. Mia tugged on Lyra's sleeve, holding out her dessert cup. "You can have the rest," she said happily. Lyra smiled again, touched by the gesture, and took a small spoonful. It tasted strange, sweet, cold, and somehow comforting. Then Jake looked closer at the translator and frowned slightly. "This thing didn't just break," he said. "Someone messed with it on purpose. The circuit was cut clean. That's not normal." Lyra froze, her smile fading. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Jake met her eyes, his tone soft but serious. I mean, someone didn't want it to work. She went silent for a moment. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My stepfather fixed it last time. After it broke. Jake leaned back slowly, his jaw tightening. Fixed it, huh? He said under his breath. Mia looked between them, not understanding. Dad? She asked. Jake smiled gently and patted her head. Nothing, sweetheart, just some people need a little help being heard. Lyra watched him, her eyes glistening. For so long she had believed silence was her only world. But sitting there, watching a human father and his little girl treat her like she mattered, something new bloomed inside her. Hope. For the first time, she didn't feel like the deaf alien girl everyone pitied. She felt seen, and somewhere deep inside she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken at all. The next morning, the sunlight spilled softly across the colony's busy market streets. Ships came and went above the skyline, their silver trails painting thin lines across the blue haze. Lyra walked slowly through the crowd, holding her newly fixed translator gently as if it were something alive. Every few steps she touched it, checking if it still worked. It hummed softly in response, steady and strong. She could still hear Jake's voice in her memory, calm and kind as he said, "You'd be surprised what a little care can do." That simple line kept echoing in her heart. It had been the first time anyone said something to her without pity. When she reached the repair shop, she hesitated before entering. The sign above the door flickered. Jake's Mechanics, we fix what others throw away. The words made her smile faintly. It sounded like something more than just a slogan. Inside, the place smelled of oil, metal, and faint traces of coffee. Machines lined the walls, some half open, others glowing with soft lights. Jake was there, working on a drone with his sleeves rolled up. His daughter, Mia, sat nearby on a stool, coloring on a tablet. Jake looked up and smiled when he saw her. Hey there, he said, wiping his hands. How's the translator holding up? Lyra smiled, her translator echoing her voice clearly. It works. Perfectly. Good to hear, Jake said. Then his expression turned thoughtful. Though I've been thinking about that device. Mind if I check something? She blinked, curious, and nodded. Carefully, she unclipped it and handed it to him again. He took it to his workbench, scanning it with a small handheld analyzer. As the screen flickered with lines of alien code, his brow furrowed. That's strange, he murmured. Lyra tilted her head. What is it? He pointed to the data display. This thing's not just a translator. There's another chip wired into it, a tracker, and it's been sending out a signal since last night. Her heart dropped. A tracker? Jake nodded, his voice steady but serious. Someone's been keeping tabs on you. She froze. For a long moment she didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she reached for the device. Can you remove it? Yeah, Jake said. But if I do, they'll know someone found out. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. Then they'll come, Jake frowned. Who's they? She hesitated, her throat tightening. The words were heavy. My stepfather and his men. Mia looked up from her drawing, confused. Your dad's mean? She asked innocently. Lyra forced a small smile. Not my real father, she said softly. He married my mother after my father died. He didn't like me much. Said I was useless because I couldn't hear. Jake felt his stomach twist with anger. He had met people like that before. People who broke others to feel powerful. He's the one who gave you this translator, isn't he? She nodded slowly. He said it was so I could talk like a normal person. But I think he just wanted to know where I went. Jake placed the device on the counter. Not anymore, he said firmly. You're not his property. Lyra's eyes shimmered with tears. No one had ever said those words to her before. Not even her mother, who had been too afraid to stand up to him. Jake picked up a small laser tool and began carefully melting the seal around the hidden chip. The faint smell of metal and heat filled the air. Sparks danced for a moment, then the light faded. He pried the small black chip free and crushed it under his boot. There, he said quietly. No one's tracking you now. Lyra stared at the crushed piece on the floor. A strange feeling filled her chest, something like relief mixed with fear. What if he comes looking? She asked softly. Jake leaned against the table, his expression calm but firm. Then he'll find me waiting. His tone made her heart skip. She didn't know why, but for the first time in her life she felt safe. Truly safe. Mia hopped down from her stool and came over, holding up her drawing. It was a picture of 3 people, Jake, Mia, and Lyra, standing together under 2 suns. "See?" Mia said proudly. "That's us." Lyra stared at the picture for a long moment, her throat tight. "Us?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Mia said, smiling. "Dad says friends help each other. You're our friend now." Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes. She covered her mouth, trying not to cry, but a few tears slipped through. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake gave her a small, reassuring nod. "You don't have to thank us. You just have to stay safe." But deep down, Jake knew things wouldn't stay quiet for long. Someone who planted a tracker wouldn't stop just because it was broken. And as the shop door chimed softly behind her when she left later that evening, a dark shape stood watching from across the street. A tall alien figure speaking into a communicator. "Target located," the voice hissed. The human mechanic interfered. "Orders?" Static filled the line for a moment before a cold reply came. "Bring them both in." The sun dipped below the colony's horizon, painting the streets in crimson light. Unaware of the danger closing in, Lyra clutched her repaired translator and whispered to herself, "For once, I'm not afraid." But by the time the night fell, her world would change again, and this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The colony's night sky shimmered with 2 silver moons, their light washing over the quiet streets like a dream. Lanterns floated above the sidewalks, flickering gently as wind moved through the narrow lanes. The day's chaos had faded, replaced by a strange calm that seemed to wrap the world in silence. Lyra walked beside Jake through the soft glow of the evening. The air smelled faintly of metal, dust, and blooming night flowers that grew along the walkways. Every few steps she glanced at him, the human who had repaired her translator, who had faced her fear without hesitation. They walked slowly, neither of them speaking for a while. It was an awkward silence, and it was peaceful, as if words weren't needed. The translator on her collar hummed quietly, ready to carry her voice, but she didn't know how to start. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "You said your stepfather did this to you?" he asked gently. Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing the metal of the translator. "He said people like me are weak, that no one would ever want to hear what I have to say." Her voice was calm, but behind it was pain, old, deep, and heavy. Jake frowned, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "People like that only know how to destroy what they fear," he said softly. "You're not weak, Lyra. You just had the wrong people around you." She looked at him, surprised by his words. "You say it like you understand." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." They turned down a narrow street lined with neon signs. The shops were closing for the night, but a few vendors still lingered, selling glowing fruit and small tech trinkets. Lyra stopped at one stand, looking at a cluster of tiny lights shaped like stars. "My father used to make these," she whispered. "Before he died." Jake watched her quietly. There was something fragile in her tone. Not sadness, but memory. "He must have been a good man," he said. "He was," she replied softly. "He told me I wasn't broken. He used to say silence isn't weakness and it's the sound before strength." Her eyes glistened in the soft light. "I forgot that for a long time." Jake didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Sounds like he'd be proud of you right now." Lyra turned to him, a faint smile breaking through her pain. "You think so?" "I know so," Jake said simply. They continued walking, the sounds of the market fading behind them. Ahead, the colony's skyline stretched out. Metal towers, glowing airships, and stars hanging low like lanterns in a vast sea. Lyra stopped near the edge of a bridge overlooking the lower district. The light shimmered on her silver dress, and the night wind lifted her hair gently. "This world looks so beautiful from here," she said softly. "But it feels lonely." Jake leaned on the rail beside her. "Yeah," he murmured. "Beauty can hide a lot of loneliness." They stood there for a while, just watching the sky. Then Lyra turned her head slightly, her voice quiet and hesitant. "Jake, why did you help me?" He looked at her, his face lit by the blue glow of the moons. "Because you needed someone to," he said. "And because I've been where you are, feeling invisible." She studied him for a moment. "Invisible?" He nodded slowly. "When humans first came to this colony, we were outsiders. No one trusted us. I fixed machines for people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. Some days I thought I could vanish and no one would notice. Her heart tightened as she listened. But you didn't vanish, she said softly. He smiled faintly. No, my daughter kept me here. Mia makes sure I remember the good things in people. Lyra's expression softened. She's wonderful, she said. She reminds me of who I wanted to be when I was young, before silence became my cage. Jake turned toward her, his voice low and steady. You can still be that person. Lyra looked down, tears glimmering in her violet eyes. You make it sound easy, Jake smiled. It isn't, but sometimes all it takes is someone who listens. The translator carried his words clearly, but she didn't need it to understand. His expression, his tone, and they said enough. Then softly he added, I hear you, Lyra. She froze, her breath catching. The words felt like light breaking through years of darkness. For someone who had lived in a silent world, those 4 words meant everything. Her eyes filled with tears. You hear me? She repeated, her voice trembling. No one has ever said that before. Jake took a slow breath, his gaze kind. Well, now someone has. They stood there, the night air wrapping around them like a quiet promise. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, faint but real, echoing through the metallic streets. Neither of them noticed the dark drone hovering high above, its lens glowing faintly red. As they walked home under the soft light of the moons, the colony around them seemed peaceful. But deep in the shadows, trouble was already moving, and soon the silence Lyra had lived with for so long would be shattered. Not by cruelty, but by a choice that would change her life forever. Morning arrived quietly on the colony, but something about the air felt different. The sun shone faintly through the smog, and the streets that were usually buzzing with chatter seemed tense, cautious. Jake's repair shop sat at the corner of a narrow lane, its old neon sign flickering like it was breathing. Inside, Jake worked with his usual calm rhythm, fixing a power converter while humming an old earth tune. His daughter Mia played with a small hoverball, her laughter echoing softly through the room. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, peaceful. Then the door chimed. Jake didn't even look up at first. Come on in, he said casually, wiping his hands. We're open. But when he turned around, his smile faded. Standing in the doorway was Lyra's stepfather, tall and broad, his dark ceremonial armor gleaming under the shop lights. Behind him stood 2 alien guards, faces cold, weapons visible. The air grew heavier instantly. Jake straightened slowly, every instinct sharpening. Can I help you? He asked calmly. The stepfather smirked. You can start by telling me where my daughter is. His voice was deep, sharp, filled with arrogance and hidden rage. Jake's jaw tightened. She's not your property, he said quietly. The man stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing against the floor. That creature disobeyed her family. She ran off with a human. Do you have any idea what that does to our reputation? Before Jake could answer, Mia appeared from behind the counter. She looked up at the towering alien, her small hand clutching her toy. Daddy, who's that? She asked softly. The alien looked down at her, sneering. Your father likes to involve himself in things beyond his kind, he said. Jake moved in front of Mia protectively. You leave her out of this. The stepfather's eyes narrowed. You're brave, human, he said, his voice full of mockery. But bravery doesn't change the order of things. That girl belongs with me. She's defective, but she's still mine to control. Jake felt his anger rise like fire. She's not defective, he said through clenched teeth. She's stronger than any of you give her credit for. The alien smirked again, but before he could reply, the shop door opened once more, and Lyra stepped inside. Her heart pounded in her chest as soon as she saw him. The man who had made her life a prison stood there, still dressed in pride and cruelty. For a moment, her knees felt weak. But then she saw Jake standing firm, Mia clutching his hand, and something inside her hardened. Leave them alone, she said quietly. The translator carried her words with crystal clarity. The stepfather turned, his face twisting into a bitter smile. You dare speak to me that way? I dare speak for myself, she said, her voice trembling but steady. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that filled the room. You speak? You couldn't even hear your own shame. Jake stepped closer, placing himself between them again. You need to go, he said coldly. The alien's smile vanished. You don't give orders here, human. He raised a hand and one of his guards aimed his plasma weapon. Mia gasped and hid behind her father's leg. Lyra's pulse raced, panic rising like lightning in her chest. But Jake didn't move. His voice was calm, his eyes locked on the stepfather. "You hurt her again," Jake said, "and I swear I'll make sure the entire colony knows what you did." The alien hesitated, realizing that humans now had more allies here than before. Officials, neighbors, people who respected Jake's work. A scandal would ruin his reputation. He lowered his hand slowly but glared at Lyra with venom. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll regret defying me." He turned sharply and his guards followed him out, the door slamming behind them with a loud hiss of pressure. For a long moment, silence filled the shop. The sound of distant machinery hummed in the background and Jake finally exhaled. Mia peeked from behind him. "Daddy, is he gone?" Jake nodded and turned to Lyra. Her hands were shaking, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble." Jake shook his head. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble was already chasing you. But next time it comes," he said with quiet certainty, "it won't find you alone." Lyra looked at him, her throat tight. "Why would you risk yourself?" "For me?" He smiled faintly. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be free." She looked down, then back up, meeting his eyes. The translator flickered softly between them, glowing like a tiny star. "Thank you," she said. Jake gave a small nod, then crouched beside Mia and whispered, "You okay, sweetheart?" Mia nodded bravely, then turned to Lyra and held out her little hand. "Don't be scared," she said. "Daddy always keeps people safe." Lyra took the child's hand gently, her heart heavy and full at once. For the first time, she truly believed those words. Outside, the sky darkened again, clouds gathering as if the colony itself could feel the storm coming. But inside Jake's shop, surrounded by warmth and quiet defiance, Lyra finally began to believe something she had never dared before, that kindness could be stronger than fear. The colony was restless that day. Whispers traveled through the crowded streets, about the human mechanic who had stood up to a high-ranking alien noble, about the deaf girl who dared to defy her family. Word spread like wildfire, carried by curiosity, by admiration, and by fear. Jake's repair shop stayed closed that morning. The metal shutters were down, the lights dimmed inside. He didn't want any trouble, not when his daughter was around. But trouble doesn't knock, it breaks down doors. Lyra stood near the window, staring out through the narrow glass slit. Her heart beat fast, her hands cold. "He won't stop," she whispered. The translator carried her voice clearly, but soft, almost fragile. Jake was working on his old plasma tool, pretending to be calm. "Let him come," he said. "This time you won't face him alone." Mia sat quietly at the table, drawing pictures again. Her small voice broke the tension. "Daddy," she asked softly, "is the bad man coming back?" Jake looked at her, his eyes softening. "Maybe," he said. "But we'll be okay." Before Lyra could speak again, a shadow moved across the window. Then another. Then more. Jake's instincts sharpened instantly. He turned off the tool and reached for the emergency switch near the counter, one that would lock the doors. Too late. The doors burst open with a hiss of air. Lyra flinched as 3 guards stormed in, their armor clanking, their eyes glowing under their helmets. Behind them walked her stepfather, calm, confident, cruel. Jake stepped in front of Lyra and Mia, his stance wide, protective. "You're trespassing," he said. The stepfather ignored him, his gaze fixed on Lyra. "You made a scene," he said coldly. "You embarrassed me. Do you know what happens to those who shame my name?" Lyra's breath caught. "I'm not yours to shame anymore," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The alien sneered. "You're nothing. You were born broken and you'll die that way." Jake's fists clenched. He took a slow step forward. "She's not broken," he said. "She's standing here, speaking for herself, something you could never do without hurting someone." The alien's guards raised their weapons. Lyra stepped forward suddenly, standing beside Jake. Her translator flickered, but her voice didn't waver. "Stop," she said. The guards hesitated. Everyone did. Lyra's stepfather turned sharply toward her. "You dare order my men?" She met his gaze, her eyes glowing faintly with tears and fury. "No," she said, "I'm not ordering them. I'm asking them, do you even hear yourselves? You serve a man who fears a voice like mine." The crowd outside had started to gather, drawn by the noise. Dozens of aliens and a few humans stood in the street watching through the open door. The translator carried every word she said into the air. Lyra took another step forward. "All my life you told me to stay silent," she said, her voice rising. "You said my voice didn't matter, that my silence was easier for everyone. But you were wrong. My silence isn't weakness." The translator flickered again, struggling to keep up, but she didn't stop. "It's strength. Because even when you broke me, I still stood up. Even when you tried to erase me, I still found someone who listened." Jake stood beside her, his eyes proud and unflinching. The stepfather's jaw tightened, his rage boiling. "You don't know what you're saying," he snapped. Lyra took one more step forward, her voice now echoing across the market outside. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I am not broken." The translator glowed brighter than ever, amplifying her words across the street. The sound reached every ear, every whispering bystander. Even the guards hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. Her stepfather lunged forward in anger, grabbing her arm. But before he could strike, Jake moved faster. He caught the alien's wrist midair and shoved him back. The man stumbled, crashing into a shelf of metal tools that clattered to the floor. The crowd gasped. The guards raised their weapons again, but one of them hesitated, then lowered his rifle. "Enough," the guard muttered. "She's telling the truth." Another followed his lead. The last one looked uncertain. Lyra's stepfather looked around, realizing his control was slipping. "You fools!" he shouted. "She's free!" Lyra said, cutting him off. The crowd outside erupted in murmurs. Some cheered softly. Others just stared, but no one sided with him. Jake took Lyra's hand gently, guiding her a step back. "You've said enough," he whispered. Lyra shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No," she said, smiling through them. "For once in my life, I finally said everything." Her stepfather's eyes burned with hatred as he turned and stormed out, his guards following in silence. The moment he was gone, the crowd outside began to clap, slowly, then louder. Aliens and humans alike looked at Lyra with awe. Jake smiled faintly. "Looks like they heard you." Lyra turned toward him, her chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. "You helped me find my voice," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "You always had it," he replied. "You just needed someone to listen." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the colony in gold. Lyra stepped out into the light, her translator still humming softly, but for once, her voice didn't need it, because in that moment, the whole colony could hear her, not through machines, not through pity, but through the power of truth. The storm had passed, but its memory still lingered in the colony air. The next evening was calm. The streets washed clean by the rain, the twin moons glowing high above like gentle guardians. For the first time in a long while, Lyra walked without fear. Every step felt lighter, every breath freer. The story of her defiance had already spread through the market. Some aliens whispered her name with respect, others with disbelief. But she didn't care. For once, the silence around her was peaceful, not painful. That night, she found herself standing in front of the same restaurant where it had all begun, the same table where she had been humiliated, the same place she had once believed her voice meant nothing. The glowing lights inside painted the glass with warmth and color, and there through the window she saw Jake and little Mia sitting at a table, laughing over a bowl of dessert. For a moment she just watched them, father and daughter, so simple, so human, yet everything she had ever wished to feel, belonging. Then Mia spotted her through the window. The little girl's face lit up instantly. She waved both hands and shouted something that made the other guests turn their heads. Jake turned too, his expression softening the second he saw Lyra standing there in the doorway. He stood and opened the door for her. "We were just talking about you," he said with a grin. Lyra smiled shyly. "Good things, I hope." "The best things," he replied. Mia tugged at Lyra's hand as soon as she sat down. "I told Daddy you'd come. See, I was right," she said proudly. Lyra laughed in a soft musical sound. It was strange hearing her own laugh again. It wasn't perfect. It wavered and cracked. But Jake and Mia's laughter joined hers, blending like something meant to be. As they ate together, Lyra's mind drifted to the day before, the shouting, the courage, the fear, and then the way the crowd had listened. Her stepfather had left the colony soon after, too ashamed to stay. The weight that had followed her for years had finally lifted. When the plates were cleared, Jake leaned back in his chair and looked at her with quiet curiosity. So, he said, what now? You have a chance to start fresh, and what will you do with it? Lyra thought for a moment, then said softly, I want to help others like me, those who were told to stay silent. I want to build something, maybe a school for the hearing impaired where they can learn, speak, or sign freely. Jake nodded slowly, pride flickering in his eyes. That sounds like something worth fighting for. She smiled faintly. I used to think I had nothing to offer, but you showed me that I do. Jake shook his head. You did that yourself. I just fixed a machine. You fixed something far more broken, the way people see you. Lyra looked down, her cheeks warming. You always know what to say. Mia climbed onto her father's lap and grinned at Lyra. You're gonna be famous now. Everyone at school will talk about the alien girl who shouted at a noble. Jake chuckled. She didn't shout, Mia, she spoke. There's a big difference. Lyra's eyes softened. He's right, Mia. Sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest change. The three of them stayed there for hours, talking, laughing, sharing stories of old Earth and distant stars. The restaurant that once echoed with humiliation now rang with warmth and joy. When the night grew late, they stepped outside together. The streets glimmered under soft moonlight. Lyra paused near the same corner where Jake had first written the words, Are you okay? On his data pad, Jake noticed her staring and asked quietly, What is it? She smiled, her voice tender. That was the moment everything changed. When you asked if I was okay, I wasn't, but you saw me. You heard me. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, Everyone deserves to be heard, Lyra. Her eyes shimmered with tears. And you deserve to be thanked, she whispered. Jake smiled faintly. You don't owe me anything. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but sure. Then let me say one thing before I forget. He nodded. Go ahead. Her translator flickered slightly, but her words came clear and strong. You told me once that I deserve better. She looked up at him, her violet eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. You were right. But what you don't know, Jake, is that I found it. Jake blinked, surprised. Found what? She smiled, a soft, radiant smile that said everything without needing another word. Better. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mia yawned, resting her head against Jake's shoulder. He chuckled quietly, wrapping an arm around her. Come on, he said. Let's get her home before she falls asleep on the street. As they walked away together, a human father, his daughter and an alien girl who had finally found her voice. The city lights shimmered above them like stars. And for the first time in her life, Lyra didn't feel like an echo in someone else's world. She felt heard. She felt whole. She felt human.